Alright, cool. So, hello and welcome to an explanation. So, I'm streaming this live, but I will be posting this section to YouTube. I'm going to be doing a bit of an explanation about the balance mod that has just been launched, the official Relic Winter Balance Preview, which is a mod which you can play, and those changes will be hopefully making it into the main game down the line, unless there's a lot of feedback against it, or if changes need to be made, then they can be made during the process of the mod, which will be in testing for I don't know how long exactly, but it'll be at least a month and probably up to 2 months. So yeah, for a bit of context, myself, Mirage Flower, and Mr. Smith, we were contacted by Kyle, asked if we wanted to do this balance mod, since we have all done our own mods, and we were very adept in the modding tools. So that's the main reason why we were chosen. Like, we're not exactly the high tier players or anything. Though he did also reach out to high tier players asking for their opinions on things, but it was mainly just because we knew how to use the tools, because we had made our own mods in the process, and that also shows that we know how to balance things and try and think objectively. So the things that we could change was it was a list of a few things, and these are highlighted in bold: the light tanks and vehicles, squad formations and clumping, the US mortar, penals and guards, and Vermont infantry scaling. So the reason why these were chosen was for a few reasons, but I believe one of the main things was to do with, there was a community feedback survey that was being sent out a couple of months ago that people were filling out, and those are what people rated to be the most important. But it was also to do with some other things, like just off of tournament games, that, and like off of, I think, player feedback as well. Carl said he tuned into streams and stuff. So these changes, they didn't come out of nowhere. They are some of the most, they were at least some of the most important issues in the game, but unfortunately, yeah, the list is a bit limited, and furthermore, we couldn't change things even though we knew there would be predictable consequences of what this would end up in. But on Relic's side, they don't want this massive patch that reworks the entire game, because then it can have a lot of unforeseen consequences, and it can end up crippling the game temporarily. Because the thing is, with an official patch, is it takes a bit of work to actually implement and to fix. So if there is all of a sudden a huge problem, hot fixing it is difficult. Whereas from mod, we have freedom to do whatever. But either way, yeah, that was it. And the plan is, or the hope is at least, is that if this goes very smoothly, if it goes into the game and most people are happy with the feedback and there's no major issues, then hopefully we'll be able to do more down the line to then fix the other issues that everyone's familiar with. Things like rebalancing medium tanks, like reworking USF or OKW veterancy 5 scaling, things like that, or like rocket artillery in general. Anyway, so let's go ahead and read out some of these changes, and I'll give some context and some bit more information if it's necessary, but most of these are pretty self-explanatory. So one of the main things is squad formations and clumping. This is kind of a bit misleading though, because this only affects clumping when squads are out in the open. So, and that's still a really nice change, because previously you would have some squads, especially with things like Fallschirmjägers and Obersoldaten, the elite 4-man infantry, they would clump up, and what that meant is that they would get wiped very easily by tanks and mortars and such, even when they're just walking around out in the open. Squads will still clump when behind cover. That, unfortunately, we can't fix given the limitations of the mod tools. The thing is with that, though, is that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you want to have your squad clumping behind cover against small arms, because then you all take less damage, you all don't get suppressed. You don't want to have that one guy that runs around the corner. Long time no stream. Well, Wargamer, there is actually, I don't have stream alerts on. The reason why, the exact reason why I haven't been streaming CO2 in a while is because of this patch. Because I've spent the past month working on this patch, there's been a lot of work gone into it, a lot of testing, a lot of iteration, and this was kind of under wraps, so I couldn't stream this, I couldn't really talk about it. So yeah, that is the reason why, and now that it's out, I'm going to be playing a lot of this, streaming a lot of it, casting a lot of replays, trying to get all this feedback and make changes if they're required. I'm just going to turn on Twitch alerts quickly, because I have a different scene, which is like a screen capture, so it doesn't have that set up. Remember how to do a browser source. Yeah, here we go. Twitch alerts. And I'll just put on the chat as well. Just because, like, when it's on YouTube, it helps if you can see the chat from other people, so you know kind of the context of what I'm responding to. Let's be real, streaming Code 2 is just frustrating because a live game is frustrating with cheese. I mean, that's certainly a part of it as well. But I still would stream it just for the fun. You can play it, in a couple of games and not get too concerned by that. It's more so when you're like playing it competitively, and that's when you get really mad. But yeah. Anyway, moving on. So the clumping, yes, it will mean that your squads space out more when they're out in the open. And what we did is we copy pasted the formation from the infantry section because they had really good spacing, whereas some other squads in particular had really bad spacing. It was also inconsistent depending on squad sizes. Like generally the smaller squads actually clumped up more, which then doubly makes them more vulnerable to AoE. I just think I should put some music on because otherwise this can be a bit dull if it's just like my voice ranting about Company of Heroes. Let's go. Also, you can probably hear the aircon as well. It's really hot, so you'll have to bear with me. Okay, hopefully that's a good volume. Alright, so the squad formations, yeah, so that'll help, particularly for Axis. Like this itself is a pretty big buff for the Axis 4-man squads in particular. Because generally, Grenadiers, the 4-man squads, your Fallschirmjägers, your Obersoldaten, those are the ones that are the most vulnerable to AoE. So it affects everyone, but it definitely affects, it affects those squads the most. And yeah, that'll... Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. I'm adjusting the sound level. Let me know if the music's too loud or too quiet. It's kind of hard to balance. So yeah, moving on from that, that'll help. What we actually had the thought of doing was if we gave light cover, like a damage reduction as well. Because the thing is with heavy cover actually grants you 50% less damage, and I think it's 50% less accuracy as well. So heavy cover, even though you're clumping, it's generally beneficial being behind cover. So if a tank shot hits you, or a mortar shell hits you, as long as it's coming from the forward direction, it will reduce damage by half. Same with grenades is the main thing as well. Like a lot of times, if you're too late to dodge a grenade, you'll be better off just staying in the heavy cover. Like the worst thing you can do is half dodge it, where you like walk out of cover and then the grenade hits you for full damage because you've left your cover. So what we thought about doing is if we reduce, or if we give light cover like a 1 or 2% reduction against damage, just something tiny, what that means is then mortar shells won't one-shot a squad. That's certainly one way to go about it, which would make light cover less punishing against mortars. The problem with that though is it wouldn't fix things like tanks, which do 120 damage or 160 damage. So even if the tank shell hits you, it's going to kill you anyway. Personally, the way that I would have done it, and the way that I did it in my mod, which I think is way more consistent, that also has a lot of other good results as well, is by limiting the splash damage to X amount of models. For example, the mortar, I set it to only damage 3 models per squad, So if a mortar hits, it won't it won't damage more than 3 entities. The only problem with that though is that will also affect like the far AoE. Whereas it'd be nice if the mortar shell damaged everyone, but only killed like half of the squad. Because what happens is you know, when you're in cover, when you leave a building, when you're clumped up, often you can just lose the entire squad to a random mortar shell, which is quite frustrating for players. Just one sec. Hang on, I need to change something. Just closing some windows. No, not it. That one. Yeah, that's it. Cool. But anyway, we'll move on from that. So another thing as well is a really nice change, which wasn't quite relevant, but a very nice change regardless, and we're able to kind of refer to it as a light vehicle rebalance, and it'll help the Wehrmacht scaling. So this is to the reinforcement half tracks. So the 250 half track, 251 half track, the Soviet M5, and there's a couple of other call-ins for US and for Brits as well. Hello, Carilio. Hope you're well. So with this, what we wanted to do is give half tracks shared veterancy. So it means that if there's squads nearby that are fighting, the half tracks will vet up, and that's the same with how the US officers work. So the reason why that is because the half tracks don't have enough damage to ever vet up, and yet when they get their gun upgrades, the flame half track or the quad half track, it actually then it prevents them from reinforcing, and that's what a lot of the reinforcer bonuses are. So by giving them shared veterancy, it'll help half tracks scale as reinforcement platforms. So you can use them to supplement your forces, and they'll actually be vetting up in the process, which will allow you to use them a bit easier. The next thing was a bit of a quality of life change. The load times were standardized, because I believe previously the load times were randomized between 1 and 4 seconds. So it was always a bit inconsistent when you would try and put units in and out of half tracks. So that allows you to use a half track to pick up a squad that's about to get wiped if you have a bad retreat path, or if you want to use them more aggressively to deliver Panzergrenades. So it just gives a bit more utility to the half track, because currently half tracks were just worthless, really. You would see them sometimes, but not so much. Especially because the thing is with the Wehrmacht is, because they are one of the only factions that don't have forward retreat points. It means that in those really big team games, especially, if you have squads on the field, it's really punishing to retreat them all the way back to your base. But then you can't leave squads on a lot of health. Sorry, you can't leave squads with not much health on the field. Say you have a squad, yeah, it's 4 models, but if your Grenadier squad has 70% health, it's too risky, because the fact that it get wiped so easily by AoE. So Wehrmacht have been in this awkward spot where their squads are the most fragile, and yet they don't have full retreat points, so they kind of have to stay on the field, which then their squads get wiped easily. So it's kind of this awkward paradox, and we wanted to try to alleviate some of that. Down the line, you'll see we also kind of fixed the medical kits, but also the half-track reinforcing will help as well. So handbrake is a quick thing to prevent unwanted movement. Often the half-track, you would eventually lose it just because of user error. Like you would accidentally drive it into enemy lines. Or if you would select a bunch of units and you only wanted to select the infantry. So that's kind of a quality of life change, which now you can immobilize this thing intentionally to prevent it from accidentally moving around and getting killed. So I just wanted to respond to some chat comments quickly. So just have a concern on 3v3 or 4v4. How will allies compete with Axis tanks if their early game is evened out? Okay, so the one thing for this patch that you have to bear in mind is the primary concern was with Wehrmacht infantry scaling. So the penals and the guards They've been rebalanced around Grenadiers and around Panzer Grenadiers and around Wehrmacht. So the problem with that, though, is because we actually couldn't change OKW, it probably is going to be a bit of a balance concern that you'll have, Obers scaling incredibly well, other things like Panzer Fusiliers and Fallschirmjägers, all these elite infantry which have ridiculous vet bonuses, especially when now there's better spacing and light vehicles are being nerfed. It's going to make, I think, OKW especially, perhaps a bit overpowered in the late game. I think for Wehrmacht it'll be fine. I think that's going to be a really nice, more streamlined and even balance throughout the game, given that they're going to be able to survive. They'll be able to have a lot more map pressure now, the light tanks being nerfed. But yeah, it is a problem with OKW. Hopefully we can change this next patch. Our hands were tied when it came to equalizing the faction balance. We could only really touch Wehrmacht and the Guards and Penals in particular to balance that out. As for the tanks, though, I think personally SU-85s and Fireflies are amazing. I don't think as Soviets you have any problems with I can't kill these Tigers. And with Brits, it's kind of the same as well. You have the Fireflies, you have the really good 6-pounder AT guns. The Piats have been reworked to be a bit less good versus heavies, but they're still going to be nice against mediums and such. However, the problem is that the Jackson is awful. The Jackson is not on the same par as the Su-85 and the Firefly, in my opinion, and the reason being is it's very fragile. Given how weak it is, it dies so easily, and I would absolutely love to give the Jackson a health buff in exchange for nerfing the mid-game even more of US by maybe removing the free officers, for example, because you just can't rely on the Jackson in anything. In 1v1s, you generally rely on the Pershing or the AT guns and the Calliope. In team games, you generally just don't build AT. I find it in a 4v4, if you have like a Soviet player or a British player, they build the anti-tank because their anti-tank is better than the Jackson. The US maybe with some AT guns, but it will generally just focus on riflemen and arty and whatever commanders they have. So yeah, I mean, this isn't going to be an amazing patch overall in terms of equalizing everything, but it is definitely a good step in the right direction. The light tanks have been absolutely game-breaking in 1v1 competitive play for years now, and a lot of the other changes will help smooth things out. So basically bear with us. If this patch goes smoothly, then we can look to addressing things like OKW late game. And kind of the thing is as well that is a bit frustrating is like everyone's telling us these things like, oh, well, this is going to be overpowered now. And it's like, yes, we know. Like, you don't need to tell us. We are aware of these balance issues that are quite predictable and that we can see coming. But yeah, we couldn't really change them, unfortunately. But the way I see it, right, is like we have fixed like 15 things and maybe we've created like 2 or 3 more problems. So when you kind of subtract it, we have done a total of fixing like 12 things, which is like a lot. Those numbers were just made up, but you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. Anyway, going back to the changes. So yeah, half track will be more usable. I mean, that's a buff to everyone, but it especially buffs very much because they rely on the half track more. And at least the other thing as well to bear in mind with the half tracks is because of how the light tanks and light vehicles have been toned down, they're much weaker. It does give Wehrmacht a bit of a breathing room. So the problem with the half track, the 251 half track for Wehrmacht, is there's never been a way to fit it into your build, because you need to have X amount of AT by X minutes when the T-70 shows up. It gets hunted down very easily by light tanks, especially like the Stuart, for example, with the stun rounds. So we haven't really buffed the half track much. Like, this is a tiny buff, but I think it's going to be a lot more usable given the weaknesses in general now to light vehicles compared to what they were before. So Sniper's been nerfed. The cloak has been had some really nice changes to it. Basically, you can't cloak in combat. So what that means is that if a squad of riflemen flanks a sniper and the sniper gets hit, and then if the rifleman is sticking on the sniper, every time that the sniper gets hit, even if it misses, like in combat means being fired at, regardless of things hit, what it means is that the sniper won't cloak. And so that's a really good change, because the problem with the sniper is that you would flank the sniper, you would catch the sniper at a position with a nice infantry play, but it would just cloak and it would run away and you couldn't hunt it down. So snipers were low risk, high reward, because they had so much manpower bleed. They were able to, turn engagements. If I have 5 riflemen and you have 4 Grens, it's a pretty even fight. But sniper kills a rifleman, okay, now it's no longer a fair fight, now I lose. So it's not only just the manpower bleed with snipers, it's also the fact that they can instantly turn a fight in your favor. It's the alpha damage that makes them so powerful. So we wanted to make them a bit more like high risk, high reward, in terms of if you're able to outplay your opponent, if you're able to execute a flank or catch at a position, the sniper is going to have to hard retreat. It can't just walk into a bush and cloak again and then it'll be fine. So we wanted to make the sniper more of a support unit, because currently the sniper isn't really a support unit. The sniper is kind of a YOLO around the map, one-man army, just find things and kill them, and if you get caught, doesn't really matter so much because you just cloak. So now you have to be a bit more delicate with your sniper, which is, going to be a great change. So we also wanted to give it a bit more micro, because the problem with the snipers, you just attack move them. That's all you really do. You just kind of attack move. You want to fire at max range. So we made it so if the sniper fires out of camouflage, so if it's out in the open, then you can't cloak for 10 seconds. If you're in cover, I believe it's just 3 seconds, but I'm not 100% sure about that one. Back to chat again. So Hunter says, I feel like USF is missing its mid-game though. Well, the mid-game is still amazing. I mean, the thing is with US is not only do they... So I need to plug my headphones in. Maybe you can hear the beeping. That's where my headphones run low on battery. Yeah, so not only do you have still a lot of map pressure versus infantry when you have things like a T70 or an M15 showing up, which while the damage is nerfed, they're still able to force retreats, force your opponent to invest in anti-tank, and that does give you really good momentum. But then you also have the free squads, and then you also have bars which can come out and give you massive pressure. So the mid game of US is fantastic. It's just the late game kind of sucks, and I think that's mainly because of the fact that the Jackson is just lackluster. They can struggle as far as AT is concerned. So yeah, mid game it's weaker, but the mid game is still amazing, and there's a lot of other reasons why the US mid game is strong. It's not just because of the really overpowered Steward and M15 and such. Yeah, the stealth changes that also affects. It also affects things like the Jagdpanzer IV and Raketens, which were very cheesy. So that's a nice change. So the Mortar change, actually kind of surprised us when we managed to get through, because we did have a few of our changes cut, even after we had changes limited to the scope. How do you feel about a slight major cost reduction? I mean, US tech is already very cheap. Like, I don't think the tech needs to be made any earlier. I just think they don't need the free officers. But anyway, so the Mortars, this is mainly a thing for team games especially, is that when Mortars would hit Vet 3, they would get extra range on their auto attacks. And this wasn't always the case. It used to only be on the barrage. So this means that Mortars are going to be a bit weaker, especially when you have that late game situation where you have these vetted Mortars just sitting up, very safe, very far backwards, and able to poke away without any effort. And that's kind of the problem. Is it's cool to have potent artillery, but it shouldn't be so potent without having any interaction. And at least you can still use barrage with the extra range, but you won't be able to have that extra range on the auto attacks. Okay, so Puma. The reason why this is under general is because it affects both OKW and the Wehrmacht Puma as well. So there's a couple of things here as well. Does the mortar change apply to the league? No, it's just mortars. Actually, the other thing as well is, it didn't affect like pack howitzers and mortar half tracks. So the mortars were scaling unfair compared to other types of indirect fire. So the Puma has much less anti-infantry. The main gun AoE damage is reduced. So the Puma won't be able to one-shot models anymore, unless he gets a really lucky direct hit. But then it has better scatter, and that's actually a really important thing. A lot of people are really whining about this. They go, oh, you've nerfed the Puma, but the thing is the Puma was never intended to be anti-infantry. It's an anti-tank vehicle, or an anti-vehicle vehicle at least. And yet its scatter was really bad, that it would always miss. So we've improved its scatter, same with the AEC. So it's going to be more reliable against tanks, but we just nerfed the anti-infantry. So it fits a bit more into the role of the anti-vehicle. And it was important to do this because with the light vehicles and the light tanks nerfed, we wanted to make sure it was still worth going for the Puma, because we were concerned that if the Panzer II was weakened, then what's the point? You would just go Puma instead if the Puma was performing still well in anti-infantry. So moving on to penals. So penals have had some pretty harsh nerfs because they were very, very overpowered. The flame has been removed. Their veterancy scaling has been nerfed slightly, and their pop cap has been increased, and they also take longer to vet up. So yes, it's a lot of nerfs, and everyone is rioting. Everyone's freaking out. Everyone's like, oh my god, penals are useless now. But I have played probably about 20 games of the Soviet versus Wehrmacht matchup, and I can assure you, penals are still really good. They have amazing veterancy bonuses. If you don't know what them are, look them up. They're insane. They were just getting too much accuracy. They were just becoming too strong as they vetted up, because they got, I believe it was double accuracy bonus. Actually, I have a spreadsheet I can pull up. What's the link for it? Google. Yeah, here we go. Code to Infantry Veterancy. So I will show you, so you can tell for yourself. So the basic infantry, I mean the mod stats that are here is my mod, so you can ignore those. This isn't relevant. But for penals at least. So yeah, so they got 1.3 accuracy at Vet 2, and they got a further 1.3 accuracy at Vet 3, which gave them a combined total of 1.7 accuracy. Like, that is insane. Let's compare that to conscripts, to riflemen, to grenadiers. Conscripts get 1.4 accuracy, riflemen get 1.3 accuracy, grenadiers get 1.4 accuracy. So penals getting 1.7 was way too much accuracy, especially when they were already so powerful at default. And now they're still going to be getting really good veterancy. But what is it? It's 1.3 times 1.15. So I typed that wrong, sorry. 1.3 times 1.15, so 1.495. So they're still getting better accuracy than grenadiers, conscripts, riflemen, and their received accuracy is 0.77, which is, basically the same as grenadiers and such. Furthermore, they also have an amazing Vet 1 ability, To the Last Man, which, like, the more models die per squad, they get bonuses that ramp up temporarily. So yeah, like their scaling is still amazing, and anyone that says otherwise obviously doesn't actually know the stats. Furthermore, it's like, yes, they don't have any weapon upgrades, but they don't need them, at least not against Wehrmacht. Against OKW, like, yeah, they may have problem scaling with OKW stuff at Vet 5, but that's more of a Vet 5 problem. So that, yeah, they didn't need any other upgrades. They didn't need PPSHs. We actually experimented with that. That was our first iteration of penals, is we gave them a PPSH Flamer package. The problem with that, though, is we wanted to nerf the penals. So, like, we had to make the PPSHs bad, and we had to make them expensive. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a nerf, would it? And then that was a liability, though, because then it would have been really good on urban maps. And there's actually a lot of close combat maps now. You have, Bryansk Forest, Rustwerk and Essen. There's a few of them. Where can we download and pursue your glorious data? If you want to look at the spreadsheet, you can. I mean, that's a spreadsheet. I think you can read that. Just ignore all the mod stats. That's not to do with this mod. I should probably put like GG mod, just so people don't get confused. Yeah. The mod changes for. Okay, so yeah, we didn't need to give penals any upgrades to compensate because they still vet amazingly. So like everyone needs to calm the hell down. Like penals were so broken, and now they're still really good. They're still better than conscripts. You know, conscripts are bad. Regarding some other changes, again, please bear in mind that again we couldn't actually change other things. We have people in the chat talking about Molotovs out of scope. Again, everything we could change. Every single thing we could change was light tanks, vehicles, squad formations, clumping, US mortar, penals, and guards, and infantry scaling. So yes, we couldn't fix Molotovs, we couldn't change conscripts, we couldn't change shocks, which we wanted to change. There was a lot of things that we couldn't do. So just like stop suggesting things that aren't in the scope of this modding, and hopefully we can change them later on down the line. But yeah, that is true, Shadowlink. There is a lot of inconsistency between medium tanks. The accuracy on the move, especially, as you say, like 0.5 for Panzers and Panthers is just atrocious compared to like the Cromwells and Comets and Shermans and such. But yeah, so penals needed that nerf, and they are still really good. I assure you. Please play the mod if you don't believe me. Also, just for comparison, Grenadiers cost 7 pop cap, so it's like penals should not be costing the same pop cap as Grenadiers. Okay, as for guards, so and another change that everyone's freaking out about, a bunch of little nerfs that add up. So slightly more manpower cost. This doesn't actually affect the reinforcement cost. This is only the call-in cost. PTRS has had a slight nerf versus infantry. The grenade has been changed into the same stats as the MK2, which is the rifleman grenade. And the veterancy has also been nerfed a little, because also back to the vet. Guards also had insane vet. Where are they? Elite infantry, live stats. So guards had, yeah, oh man. Guards have 0.83 received accuracy at vet 2. Hopefully that's not blocking. So I'm blocking that, aren't I? Yeah, here we go. Guards have 0.83 received accuracy at vet 2, 0.77 received accuracy at vet 3. So that's a combined received accuracy of 0.63. For comparison, say paratroopers 0.78. What's a good comparison? What's Panzer Grenadiers? Where are they at? Or are they basic infantry? Panzer Grenadiers 0.71. Obers are 0.56 because like they're ridiculous. Actually, Jaegers vet up very well too. But the comparison really is comparing it to Wehrmacht, Soviet stuff. So, where are Grenadiers? Grenadiers are 0.77, Panzergren 0.71, Guards 0.64. And the thing is, right, is they're also 6-man squads. So they're 6-man squads with insane received accuracy bonuses, with insane damage, with insane long-range damage, with anti-tank and anti-infantry, and also grenades that prevent you from charging. They needed the nerfs. It was insane. So they're still going to be vetting up very well, of course. The total is 0.66 as opposed to 0.64. So like the veterancy change is tiny anyway. But I think we also did it a way that like it restructures the veterancy, so it's a bit more gradual. And yeah, the guards have had a bit of a nerf. So like these are small nerfs, but they add up. But also because penals are nerfed, that will also combine, because guards and penals were kind of so powerful, synergizing together. Okay, back to chat again. So IRS Hunter asks, if there was one thing you could change, what would it be? Jackson buff. Honestly, I gotta say Jackson buff, man. Or maybe like overscaling. I don't know. In terms of like a single individual change, probably a more global change that I would have done is I would have reworked AOE by putting like max models damaged per squad to mortars for 3 and max models damaged per squad for tanks to 2 with some exceptions, because tanks are just so inconsistent, and clumping will never be fixed. You're always going to have those frustrating, annoying wipes where you didn't make any mistakes, you didn't get outplayed, you just got hit by a lucky mortar shell, or like a tank got a lucky hit, or as they evac a garrison, you know, a pack
can wipe an entire squad. I wanted to add more consistency to AoE, and I think the only way to really do that is to give the hard limit the way the AoE works. But that I understand is like pretty radical, and you know, you can't be so radical in this. But as for a small scale, because I'm concerned about US late game is going to be crappy with it's always been crappy, and it's going to be, you know, even more crappy now. So Jackson buff, something I absolutely would want to do. Anyway, so guards, moving on from that, I think there's actually a bit more in here as well. So if the guards grenade matches USF rifleman, then why does it cost 5 munitions more? Okay, so the thing is with guards, is guards are a dedicated long range squad. They excel at long range against all targets. Whereas riflemen are kind of the opposite. I mean, with bars, they're decent at range, but riflemen are generally, you know, a short to medium range squad. So it's really counterintuitive to have a squad that is so powerful at long range to then also have a really good grenade. So we wanted to make, you know, the grenade not as strong as other squads, because we don't want to have grenades as a way of preventing assault infantry from charging up to guards. And also the fact that you have to unlock the rifleman grenades. You have to spend manpower and fuel to unlock the rifleman grenades, and same for the British. Whereas with guards, you just have them available. So it seems fair. I mean, considering it's a better squad, a long range squad, you don't have to unlock them to leave them costing slightly more. I'm just reading through chat again. Is the M20 supposed to have the same build time as before? So I think with the M20, it kind of needs to have that build time, because otherwise it would come out way too early. That being said, given that you have to buy the bazooka, it does delay the field presence of the M20 by 30 seconds, and that was intentional because, again, it comes out too early. So perhaps it's too much, the long build time, and also combined with the fact that you now have to build the bazooka in order to prevent it from just getting hard counted by the 222. So it wasn't something that we really thought about, because I feel like if we were to reduce the M20, it would just come out way too soon, and you wouldn't have any counters to it. It still comes out very soon, but not quite as bad. USS late game crappy. Have you played US meta in this patch? Okay, so I should be more specific when I say that. USF anti-tank late game is bad. US late game, their infantry is good in terms of their rifleman veterancy and the double bars, especially with double M19s, which have been removed. But yeah, riflemen scale very well. You also have a lot of anti-infantry potential with, you know, with things like the Pershing and with things like the HE Shermans, with things like the Calibers and such. You have a lot of anti-infantry. There's no doubt about that. But the anti-tank is awful. And that's the problem, is that you can struggle dealing with heavy tanks and with Panthers and things like that. So that was my concern, is that the anti-tank is bad. I mean, riflemen, though, I would say that they need more changes. You know, whether it's preventing double bars, whether it's, you know, removing some of their received accuracy scaling. I would say riflemen need some kind of change, but US would definitely need anti-tank to compensate, because their late game is flimsy. I'll put it that way. It's flimsy, if nothing else. Alright, so now we're actually moving on to the vehicles for Soviets. So half track is slightly cheaper because it was just really expensive, but that's only a small thing. The M17 quad. So the M17 quad is insane, and the M17 quad is interesting because you didn't really see it that much, just because the T70 was better. The T70 was a bit more reliable. It had, you know, more armor. It had the crew repair. It was a smaller target size. So we had to definitely nerf this down, because like if you actually have seen the damage of the M17 quad, it is nuts, and almost as good damage-wise as the T7. So it's still a lot of nerfs. It's still very powerful. It still suppresses as well. T70, not much to say really. It's just been nerfed. A lot less damage. Costs more manpower. It has more health, so it survives 2 AT gun shots, but it doesn't have crew repair. So the reason we wanted to do this is to give it more consistency, because the T70 would generally survive 2 AT gun shots if it used crew repair, but then you would have situations where the T70 just gets 2 shot by like a cloaked Raketen, or just max range AT guns. So it was inconsistent. It also was kind of overpowered when you would hit a Panzerfaust, and then it would just crew repair and drive away. So that's both a nerf and a buff, that the health and crew repair being removed. But this stuff is definitely a huge nerf, but very justified. And yes, it is severe, but the T70 I think is still very viable given how much map pressure it gives you. It forces away squads, makes your opponent build a pack which costs 320 manpower. So I definitely think you will still be seeing all these light tanks despite the nerfs. Okay, SU-70, that's not formatted right, that should be a dot point. So the barrage costs 15 munitions, it's still very cheap. Thing is with that is, as I say there in the text, you would often see SU-76 spam when you would see like 3 or 4 SU-76s, and they're very good tank destroyers, and that's fine. The problem is when you have tank destroyers that are countering AT guns, it kind of warps the counter system. Is when you have an AT gun to counter a tank destroyer, then gets countered by the tank destroyer's artillery barrage. And the barrage is bad, but when you have 3 or 4 SUs, you're gonna reliably kill or at least dislodge a pack. So you can still do it. It just costs you munitions, so you can't spam it without having to actually think about it. And furthermore, it's not really a big change because Soviets always float up munitions because they don't have many upgrades, they don't have many abilities compared to other squads, especially now that penals don't have flamers. So that also is kind of a way to try and chip down at the inflation of munitions that Soviets tend to benefit from, which is partly why mines are so powerful, because you just have so much munitions to spare. How will the 222 improve against light vehicles? Yeah, it has more pen. It also, the Stuart has a stun rounds nerfed, so it will be performing more reliably against light tanks. So the medkits has been increased. I mentioned this earlier. It will help field presence, especially in larger team games, rather than retreating. It's still expensive, 20 munitions is a lot, so you wouldn't want to burn an early game. It's more of kind of a mid-late game thing when you already have all your upgrades, but you really don't want to retreat your squads. So that's a nice little change there. Previously, it wasn't actually fully healing, but now it fully heals. Pioneers. So this was a copy pasta of my Pioneers in my mod. So Pioneers were just awful, just absolutely awful. Now a lot of people are freaking out over this. I mean, it is a tiny change. It's like a 10 or 15% buff, which is nothing. But the thing is with Pioneers is, whilst they often would win versus rear echelon and combat engineers, Pioneers would never have an impact against combat squads. So unless it was like with a flamer, of course. But in terms of Pioneers versus conscripts or riflemen, obviously you can't charge up to them, and even then you still can't charge up to them. But what was happening is you would have Pioneers that were like waiting in ambush around a hedge, or we're getting a nice flank off, and they would get the point blank jump on a squad of conscripts. And then the conscripts would just turn around and just murder them. And maybe you drop like 1 or 2 models of the conscripts, so the Pioneers will still lose. So like even in the best case possible scenario situation, Pioneers were still just not actually trading against anything other than rear echelon combat engineers. And the thing is with rear echelon and combat engineers is because they have long range damage, where Pioneers are only short, it means that you can use those 2 squads in heavy cover or in garrisons and actually trade well versus combat infantry, or at least deny time and buy some time. So despite Pioneers being better in the 1v1 duels versus other engineers, their overall impact was just absolutely pathetic. So they're better now. It's a conservative buff, but it's a nice one. Now assault grens, this is a delicate change. And these are very small buffs, and I still think assault grens will be pretty bad. Because they're not amazing buffs. The problem is just the scaling isn't very good on them. They do give you good early game pressure, but yeah, they're just not really worth it, even with these changes. However, the reason why we have to be very conservative with assault grens is because assault grens are a thing that you either build none of them or you build 5 of them, especially if you don't tech up. The way that the call-ins, they work well in blobs where you just overwhelm things. you don't have to get the barracks for them. So, we like if we made Assault Grenadiers too good, then you would just see people spamming them, and it would be absolutely filthy, like especially in team games and such. So we were very conservative with this, and I don't know, we'll have to see how they go. The grenade change is probably one of the main things that's going to be really nice in the reinforcement costs, but yeah, it's pretty minor. Also, a bit more received accuracy of Vet 1 will help too. So Panzer Grenadiers, so they have a bit more of an easier time entering the field because of how Vet 1 gives them part of their received accuracy bonus from Vet 2. So that just helps them get on the field when they're often already versing Vet 2 squads. When you're versing Vet 2 Riflemen, Vet 2 Penals, they just have a hard time actually contributing. G43 package, this is the same as the Assault Grenadiers. This is a tiny buff, which will still make them bad and not very usable. The thing is with Panzer Grenadiers though, is because of how amazing the STGs are, you can't give them a weapon which increases their damage even further, because that's ridiculous. They'll just be so powerful. Like how would you fight them, especially with things like conscripts, if they were getting even more damage? And then you can, like, we were thinking about really making the damage cutoff, thanks for the follow, of G43's more lethal in terms of like weaker at short, better at range. The problem with that though is you have to be very careful when it comes to long range damage, because long range units scale very well together in blobs, and you can have that situation then where you have like 3 or 4 Panzer Grenadiers in team games roaming around with crazy long range damage sniping things, and that's what LMGs are. The things with the LMGs is at least LMGs are pretty immobile. They can't fire while moving. They have to set up. They have that kind of that clunky aim time and such. So having a mobile long range squad is something that could go wrong. So again, we're quite conservative with the G43 chain. This is for Panzer Grenadiers and not Grenadiers. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm gonna have a drink. I've been talking a lot. Okay, the 222. It had a lot of changes, and it's really hard to visualize what these changes actually entail. So, the 222 was a weird unit. So the thing is with the 222 is its MG was bugged. Its MG wouldn't be able to fire unless it was like positioned frontal. So if you had the 222 facing like sideways and it was shooting on the side, the MG, I don't know if it wouldn't fire, but it certainly wouldn't do any damage. Like it was bugged out. So that meant the 222 was having really inconsistent damage, where sometimes the MG was doing damage, in which case the damage was insane. And furthermore, because it was relying on the autocannon for damage versus infantry, that meant that often it wouldn't do much at all, but then you would have situations where if you get up really close, the AoE would do heaps of damage, especially if squads are being pushed around or if they're being shoved up in front of cover. So we wanted to make the damage more consistent, and the way that we did that was by fixing the MG, which we then had to actually nerf the MG, because then it was fixed, it was like actually really powerful. And then we nerfed the autocannon to compensate. So overall, the damage is going to be kind of similar, but it's going to be way more consistent in terms of like it always fires and it always hits, but also because the MG is doing damage rather than the autocannon, it means that it won't do like crazy damage up close when things are clumped. And what this also does is it means that the MG, because the MG is accuracy based rather than like scatter based, because the autocannon is explosives, it means that they'll be hitting things on retreat much more consistently, whereas the 222 could often completely fail at like wiping something on retreat. The sniper would just
you would just miss every shot on retreat, and it was quite frustrating. So it's a lot of a quality of life change in a sense. Just a couple other things. We also then wanted to increase the cost because it was way too cheap. Accelerations are slightly faster, so it should be able to kite and disengage from other light tanks a bit more reliably. So that's it for the 222. So the Stilgi was just insanely overpowered, especially the fact that it was a call-in, which was able to skip teching entirely. We generally, when you go call-ins and you don't tech up, it meant that you would be punished for it in the mid game because you wouldn't have any tanks, but the Stilgi completely negated that. So not only was it insane, it was cheap, and also you had a Tiger. So I believe Mechanized had like a 80% pick rate in the Warpaint Championship, which is the most of any commander. So yeah, the Stilgi. So it costs more manpower. The health reduction allows it to be destroyed in 3 AT gun shots. And the damage changes are actually really unintuitive, and there's a lot of people are freaking out over this. So the damage has been nerfed huge in terms of the AoE is less, it scatters more. The AoE is actually radius. I think the radius is actually increased. Yeah, but it's a huge nerf. However, the thing is the scatter offset turned to 0, and that's the thing is with modding is you can't visualize what these changes actually mean, like unless you know the way that the modding works. So what that actually means is that the auto attacks are way more consistent. So with the Stilgi, it would always, I think it was undershooting. It was either undershooting or overshooting, but its auto attacks were really bad. They would always miss. So attack grounding, using the attack ground command was far more reliable, but it didn't even matter just because of how ridiculous the damage was. So what we actually did is by nerfing the damage so much, but then fixing the scatter offset, the auto attacks are now really reliable, and it's actually still doing really good damage. The damage that it pulls off is not that much weaker than before. Hits a lot, and it's just because it has less AoE, doesn't splash as many models. So yeah, don't freak out, the damage is still very good because of the scatter offset, and furthermore, it no longer collides with terrain. So previously the Stilgi was awful on elevation maps like Lungerers, and a lot of tanks suffer from that, but the Stilgi was the worst. So again, Stilgi is more consistent, and it's much weaker overall, but it's still very powerful. Especially given the fact that it's a call-in which can replace teching. And target weak point now only disables the turret rotation, so you can't lock out the main gun on an IS-2 with the Stilgi, which was insane. But it's more consistent because it penetrates. Before it would bounce sometimes. Okay, so the same with the Puma's target weak point is it only disables turret rotation. You can still fire. Now for the US, the M1919s can no longer be double equipped via weapon racks. You can still pick them up off the ground if they're dropped, but you can't double equip them. You can still get 2 bars or 2 bars, or a bar and a M1919, so that's still very strong, but it's just a bit weaker. Where previously riflemen were just too strong with their received accuracy, with their grenades, and with those long range LMGs. And we actually wanted to do it for Bren's as well, but in order to balance out Bren's, we had to do a lot of other things, which was a bit out of scope, and we had those changes cut, unfortunately. But yeah, hopefully later on, if we're able to rework Brits, because Brits are very delicate. We couldn't just remove double equipped Bren's, but then we'd have to do other things to compensate, and that was kind of this long list of other things. Same with giving them snares and such. So the 81mm mortar. So the mortar was overpowered. Now it's been cloned. It's a clone of the Wehrmacht mortar with the following modifications. It has less range, so it's more about supporting riflemen by dislodging MGs and providing smoke compared to just nuking things. And it sets up faster, so you can use it more mobile. You can be more aggressive with it to support riflemen. And then Vet 1 increases the range of the smoke. So we wanted to make it a bit more of a smoke platform. It's still very good though, because it's similar to the Wehrmacht mortar, which is really good, but it's just not as ridiculous as before.
the light vehicle crews. So crit repair takes 4 seconds, which is a long time. It means that you can't do it in combat. So if you get hit by a Faust, you can't just like pop smoke and crit repair, or drive behind a house and crit repair. The thing is though, is it still allows you to avoid mines, as in you hit a telemine, you pop out, and then you just crit repair. So I still don't like crit repair. I would have removed it, but that was a bit too drastic. It's kind of the thing is with like doing it officially is that we can't just remove things that we don't like. We have to kind of compromise a bit. But also the other thing as well is because the veterancy is much slower now on the vehicle crews, you won't always have access to it, where previously you would pretty much instantly get Vet 1, so you can from the start just crit repair almost immediately. Okay, so the M20. So the M20 costs a lot less, but it's had a bit of a damage nerf. And furthermore, the fact that it no longer starts with the bazooka crew, it delays the map pressure of the M20. Because the 222 hard counters the M20, you need the bazooka against Wehrmacht, otherwise the 222 just dies. So basically what you have to do is you either have to evac the M20 and get the up bazooka, which you can't do. You can't upgrade it while it's inside, even if you start the upgrade and then hop in. Or you put Echelon inside of the M20 and then have the crew running around in a building or whatever. So this delays the field presence of the M20, but also the fact that it's cheaper then kind of compensates for that. But then also the intention behind this was making a bit more viable late game as a mine deployer, and also for recon if you wanted that for whatever reason. So the manpower cost was just so inconsistent. The fact that it costed all that manpower. I didn't actually mention that the autocannon has more pen, so it'll be doing a bit more damage versus the Stuart, the AEC, and the T70 in particular. Yeah. Okay, so Stuart has a bit of a damage nerf, costs a bit more manpower, and stun rounds only disables weapons in the sight, doesn't affect movement. Because the problem with stun rounds, it was allowing the Stuart to actually counter the Pumas, which is a dedicated counter, and even 222s as well, half tracks. It was just far too strong. It doesn't penetrate mediums and heavies reliably, but it still can stun them, which then was even more overpowered, especially if you got a flank off. So Stuart should be much more reasonable to deal with, both as far as infantry damage and as well as it having less anti-tank impact. So the M15, bit of a controversial change. So the M15 does a lot less damage versus infantry, but it still does amazing suppression. The suppression on this thing is nuts, and that allows you to get a lot of early map pressure by forcing squads off, forcing squads to retreat because they get suppressed. It costs less manpower, so it's a bit easier to go into or easier to rebuild. And the Vet 3 bonuses have actually been fixed because they basically didn't work. Vet 3 didn't exist pretty much for the AI half track, and now that's fixed. So we wanted to distinguish the M15 and the Stuart, where the Stuart is more about damage and the M15 is more about suppression. But even then, the damage on the M15 is still actually really good. Like if you look at it, it's still really nice. And furthermore, it's the main gun damage. It's not the machine guns. They still do the full damage. Okay, so this is just a little quality of life because the call-in half-track was awful. Same as that as well. That was coming out too soon. That's the one with that's tactical support, the one with the quad, and this I believe that's like mechanized with the engineers. Okay, so OKW, the Stim Pioneers, their medical crates not only have no vet requirements, they also cost less munitions. So the intention behind this, well, two things really. The intention behind this was to allow mechanized play to be more viable, especially given that the Panzer II is receiving a damage nerf. We wanted to make it less of a high risk reward, because the problem with mechanized and Panzer II, even though the Panzer II, the damage was insane and it was really strong, the fact that you lost your medics out, you had to do so much pressure, or you would just lose to having weaker squads. So now that risk reward element has been reduced. This also allows OKW to use the medical crates to stall out for the battle group heals, because currently it takes too long to get the heals. You have to go truck, battle group, and then the upgrade, and that just took ages. And that can definitely suffer OKW's early game when they need to get the heals but they can't afford it. So now you can use the medical crates to supplement that early game, and that will allow you to have a bit more of a more robust early game. Okay, so the flak half track, more garrison damage, and that is a huge thing against Maxims in particular. OKW would struggle versus garrisons in general, but against Maxim spam, they certainly lack a lot of options. So we also wanted to give it a bit more durability, and giving it more health would just probably make it too strong. So we gave it now the smoke ability at Vet 0, but it actually costs munitions, where previously it was free. It also has a bit more penetration, just so it can kind of damage T-70s and Stuarts. It's still going to be crappy versus them, but it will at least contribute some damage before it dies. Did you guys fix the OKW medics heal rate bug? Okay, fun story. The OKW medics actually are not bugged. If you do tests, if you actually test it, they are the same. If you look at the stats, they are the same. There is no difference between the medics. The reason why OKW is regarded as having weak healing is because of the way that the battle group retreat works. Is that when you retreat all your squads to the battle group, they all clump up around like the antenna where they retreat to. So what that actually means is that it obscures the movement of the medics. Say you have like a couple of wounded models in the middle, and surrounding him is a big blob of infantry, which are full health, and that actually prevents movement. So often you will have only like one medic actually healing a squad, because then the other two medics can't get within range to heal. So it's more complex than people realize. It isn't healing rate. It's to do with the way that the clumping works. And so we changed the medics the way that they don't go after units that are retreating. So that will help them in that regard. I can't remember if there was something else to fix that specific issue of like the clumping blocking medic movement, but it would be better given the retreat change, so that medics no longer chase retreating models. Okay, so the Panzer II. So the Panzer II is in a weird spot. As I said, the damage was insane. It was really, really good, but mechanized was just not very popular because of the lack of medics. So we nerfed the Panzer II, but still we actually could be seeing more Panzer II usage, given the fact that it's a lot more viable now, the mechanized truck in general, and it has more garrison damage, which will also help versus Maxims. Now, regarding the vet, no, the Danyek was asking me about this. We haven't thought about the veterancy. Maybe it'll need less, but I don't know. I don't think it's really a problem, especially given how potent the vet bonuses are. You know, it vets up insane. So yeah, I don't know. We'll look into it. Not an urgent priority. Aim shot doesn't hit infantry, so that prevents it from using aim shot to wipe things on retreat, especially the sniper, for example. .25 moving accuracy in live. Yeah, so the Luke's is interesting, because the thing is with the Luke's is it actually its main gun uses accuracy rather than just scatter. So it's not quite as bad as you would think on the move, because of the fact that it's like against retreating things in particular, small arms that use accuracy generally work better than explosives that use scatter, which is like a T70 or a Stuart. But it was pretty bad, so we buffed its moving accuracy slightly. But it's not as horrible as you would initially think when you compare it to, oh well, the T70 has a whatever the T70 has on the move, probably like 0.5 or something. Alright, so the Piats. Now, we had a lot of changes for Brits that didn't get through, but the Piats one is a very, very nice change, and probably one of the most important changes for British. So what the Piats do, long story short, is where we're nerfing the Piats' damage, but we are giving them a tracking projectile, so like the bazooka or the Shrek. And so what this does is it allows the Piats to actually work against light tanks and light vehicles, where previously it would just miss. You couldn't hit moving targets. It scattered too much for the small target size of those light tanks to actually be reliable. So the problem with British is they had a really weak and flimsy early game in 1v1 in particular, because of the fact that they were just completely wrecked by the 2-2 and the Panzer II and such. But in the late game, the Piats were just insanely broken versus heavy tanks, because of the deflection damage in particular, and the fast rate of fire and such. So we've nerfed them, but now that they're hitting tanks reliably, you'll actually be able to build them early game to hold off 2-2s and Panzer IIs, and against mediums they'll be much better as well. But it's just they won't be able to counter like Tigers so easily. So this is going to be a nice change for team games in particular, where like mass Piat blobs were crazy. Okay, the Universal Carrier, we buffed the Wasp, because the Wasp was just awful. So you can use the Wasp now, which will help the garrison clearing of British, which they lack, and give them more tools to dislodge machine guns, which they also lack. So the AEC, bit more armor, because that armor was actually terrible. It was weaker than an M20 with armored skirts. It would die to AP ammo MGs and S mines incredibly fast, which was silly. But it has less scatter, so it hits tanks more reliably, just like with the Puma. This is a bit unintuitive. Angle scatter's reduced, but the max scatter's increased. The max scatter though is a bit less important. But this is a buff to scatter. And then its anti-infantry has been nerfed, so it won't be killing infantry as effectively. So again, like the Puma, its purpose is anti-vehicle. It shouldn't have so much anti-infantry as well. And then Treadbreaker's just being more consistent. And yeah, that's it. A lot of bug fixes too. I probably won't even read these. There's a lot, and they're really nice though as well. Some really good bug fixes, some really good quality of life changes as well. I won't read these. I'm pretty worn out, to be honest. A lot of ranting over the past hour, but yeah, have a read through them. There's a lot of things there. A lot of people always like asking, "Did you fix this?" And it's like, yes, read the bug fixes we did. So, with that, without further ado, I'm going to play a game because I am keen, and I've been ranting for a while.